I'm grateful that you are here. I know this is the fourth of the series of 4 sessions for discussion of Baha'u'llah and Peace. And with Los Angeles traffic.
I didn't mention the title for tonight, so you want to mention. I forgot to mention the title. Of course, everybody knows.
Yes, I'll mention the title as well. Anyway, I know that in Los Angeles, driving and coming on today's Monday, right? On a Monday evening is a very difficult task, and so I thank you for coming. The 4 lectures that we had, the overall topic was Baha'u'llah and Peace. I decided to have these 4 talks because this year is celebration of the birth of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith. 200 years ago, he was born. And more than anything else, really, Baha'u'llah and his message and his character and his words are defined by concept of peace. That was the goal, the main goal of his revelation and his life. But in order to discuss Baha'u'llah and Peace, we looked at 3 different aspects of writings of Baha'u'llah in the form of reconstructions and reinterpretations. Now this is the last of them, so we discussed the question of peace in the writings of Baha'u'llah a little bit more directly by looking at reconstruction of the temple. In other words, I am going to discuss one of the most important works of Baha'u'llah, which is famous as the Surah of Temple or Surah of Haykal. Fortunately, the entire tablet is translated. This tablet was revealed in late Adrianople times, and then when Baha'u'llah is exiled to Akka, Baha'u'llah writes particular letters to the rulers of the world, and includes those addresses within this same work. And so this work began to be written during the later parts of Baha'u'llah's stay in Adrianople, but was completed when in the first year of the stay of Baha'u'llah in Akka. There is one place in the Surah of Temple that he mentions that because of his exile to Akka, he decided that he would announce his cause globally to the leaders of the world. But at the same time, his address to the king of Iran, which is one of the rulers that he addresses, that particular tablet of king of Persia was written in Adrianople. And it was the time that Baha'u'llah just heard that he is going to be exiled to Akka. He mentions that soon they are going to exile us to a place called Akka. So this work is the time of transition from Adrianople and the beginning of Akka. And the whole thing is translated, fortunately, in summons of the, what is the name of that book? Of the Lord of Hosts, yes. So in the handout that I have prepared, we are going to discuss a number of issues related to this particular work of Baha'u'llah, this Surah of Temple, and how Baha'u'llah is reconstructing the concept of temple. So I have written one Surah of Temple as the Universal Declaration, and then number 2, Temple in the Bible, number 3, Temple in the Writings of the Bab, and finally 4, Temple in the Surah of Temple, or in the Surah of Haykal, this particular work. And at the end there is a short conclusion. I plan to be concise, discussing so many things which is included in this handout. So hopefully I would not deviate and would not go into much details. That's usually one of my faults. I go into too many diversions and my talks becomes longer than what it should be. So first, let's address the first question, Surah of Temple as Universal Declaration. You know that Baha'u'llah had three declarations, three announcements of his station and his mission. The first one was really concealed revelation, and the first lecture that we had was discussion of that concealed revelation and how Baha'u'llah reconstructed the concept of victory, which became the essence of peace, really. The second declaration of Baha'u'llah was in the Garden of Rizwan in the year 1863, but this declaration was for a very limited number of people, and although Baha'u'llah declared his station, from then on he was expressing his station and his claim with wisdom. So throughout the Adrianople time, and before that, for the 4 months that he was in Istanbul, his writings really are writings of transition, that is preparing the Babi community for understanding that he is the promised one that the Bab has talked about. So although in Rizwan this Baha'u'llah has mentioned this to a select group of people, majority of the Babis, they didn't know exactly what is the station and claim of Baha'u'llah. He was preparing them in a gradual fashion. It is finally in the Universal Declaration of Baha'u'llah, namely in the Surah of Temple, that formally the absolutely explicit universal public declaration of Baha'u'llah is taking place. And if there was no other reason, that very fact would make this of a very central historical, theological work with regard to the Baha'i faith. So we have to look at it in a number of ways. The first is that here Baha'u'llah has decided now to be completely explicit about his station, universally, publicly declare his claim. It is for that reason that you see the structure of the Surah of Temple. At first, if you don't know this, it might seem a little strange, because the first parts of the Surah of Temple are discussions which are addressing the Babis, the followers of the Bab. And to some extent, it is even responding to some of the objections that the brother of Baha'u'llah, Yahya Azal, was raising against Baha'u'llah. And after that, Baha'u'llah addresses the clerics, the divines, and that is followed by his addresses to the rulers of the world. First he addresses the Pope, and then the Emperor of France, Emperor of Russia, Queen of England, and finally the Persian king. But why, in a work that he's addressing these rulers of the world, and the main point, as we would discuss it, is invitation to peace, why in such a work he begins with extensive discussion of the issues that Babis were preoccupied with? I want to explain this, clarify this a little bit. So I have written here, by the way, I chose one of the statements of Baha'u'llah which repeats with different wordings a number of times all over this Surah of Temple. And this, for me, is a symbol of his universal declaration to entire humanity of his cause, of his mission, of the purpose of his revelation. So the first statement, after it says first Surah of Temple, Universal Declaration, is a statement of Baha'u'llah in the Surah of Temple. But as I mentioned, a number of statements like that are repeated in Surah of Temple. Baha'u'llah says, this is your Lord, the Almighty, the All-Knowing, who has come to quicken the world and unite all who dwell on earth. This statement and a number of statements like that are expressions of majesty. He's declaring that the revelation of divine has happened, and God is now speaking through Baha'u'llah, and that this new revelation, this new age has come. And the purpose of this is to revive the world and to unify the world. Reviving the world, quicken the world. The world is dead, namely spiritually it is dead. A spiritualization of the world and bringing unity to the world. These are the purpose of this revelation. So this is one of the best short examples of how he is announcing his cause. But now he's announcing it to the entire world. For understanding the question that I raised before, why at first it has these extensive discussions about addressing the Babis and so on, I have written A, B, C, D, a few points. So let's look at them very briefly. First, just a fact that he begins with addressing the Babis for his declaration. Why he does that? Because the Babi religion is the latest religion in the sacred history. And so the first, in order to declare his cause, the first group that he's addressing, of course, naturally becomes the Babis. So for his universal declaration, the first addressees of this emergence of this new revelation of God become the Babis. And the Babis, of course, were defined, the Babi faith was defined in terms of preparation for the coming of a promised one that the Bab has talked about him. And Baha'u'llah himself was one of the members of that Babi community. And everybody around him are members of the Babi community. And he is being exiled and he's suffering together with others because of the fact that he belonged to the Babi community, and of course he was the actual leader of that community and so on. But it makes sense then that the immediate declaration of the new revelation would be that he whom God shall make manifest, that the promised one that the Bab has talked has appeared. And so this universal declaration first has to address them. And after that, the divines of all religions are addressed. Then it's interesting. He wants now to address the rulers of the world. But in order to do that, first he addresses Pope. Because the Pope is a divine who has also temporal power. And so immediately after he addresses the divines of the world, he addresses the Pope. And then he goes towards other rulers of the world, of France and Russia and England and Iran. So the order also is not accidental. Nothing really in the writings of prophets of God are accidental. After A and B, which I mentioned briefly, is C. I have written negation of the law of the sword. Now, one additional reason that in a tablet that primarily he wants to discuss the question of peace and invites the world to peace, one of the reasons that in such a work he begins by addressing the Babis, one reason for that is this very important historical sociological fact that although the religion of the Bab was religion of nonviolence, and all the real teachings of the Bab was teaching of nonviolence, But because the Baha'i faith was the point of transition between Islam and the Baha'i faith, so the Bab did not formally abrogate the laws of the sword. But he made all those laws of the sword, like jihad, in varieties of ways of that, made them dependent on impossible conditions. So he actually abrogated the law of the sword, but not formally. Because it is the point, he was the point of transition, and for the Shia Muslims of Iran, their concept of the promised one primarily was defined in terms of sword and violence. Killing so many people, and by force of the sword becomes the ruler of the world. So because people expected the Bab to be like that, so he did not formally eliminate the language of the sword. But in reality, of course, he abrogated that. In my works like Gate of the Heart and so on, I have discussed these things extensively, and in other places is not the place to discuss them. But then the interesting point is this, that during the time of Baghdad, which is from 1853 to 1863, during this time, the formal leader of the Baha'i community is Yahya Azal, the brother of Baha'u'llah. But in reality, of course, he was timid and he was always in concealment and hiding and did not interact with the Babis. For that reason, Baha'u'llah didn't want that, but in reality, he became the actual leader. He was the one who represented the Baha'i community to the world, and all oppressions and persecutions were targeted against him, because he was the outward person who stood for the faith and spoke and defended with courage and power. Yet Baha'u'llah never questioned the idea that Yahya Azal is the formal leader of the Baha'i community. Yahya Azal was the leader of the Baha'i community, and Baha'u'llah never questioned that, neither during the time of Akka nor later on. But what makes them separate during the time of Adrianople is the fact that Baha'u'llah, after the time of Rizwan, claims that the age of the Baha'i religion is over, and that the promised one has come. A new religion has started. A new revelation of God has come, which is through Baha'u'llah. Vast majority of the Babis accepted the claim of Baha'u'llah, which is the first time in the history of all religions. No religion is like that. Right now, it's 14 centuries after the coming of Islam. Right now, we have much more Christians in the world than Muslims. It means that for every prophet of God that has come, a vast majority of the previous believers did not recognize and did not accept the new religion. The only exception to this rule is the Baha'i faith. Namely, within a short period of time, more than 90%, close to 95% of all the Babis accepted Baha'u'llah, and they became Baha'i, which is due to the way that the Bab educated his followers, which I don't have time to discuss that. Now, that is why then they become separate. Namely, Yahya Azal believes that no new religion has come, that Babi religion continues and should continue, and the promised one should come in the distant future. But Baha'u'llah announces that a new religion has appeared. And for that reason, Yahya Azal becomes just one of the divines. Like all the other divines of any religion who reject the new manifestation of God, the new prophet of God, Yahya Azal and others, they become those who remain the Babis. They become some of the divines. And instead of being a force for closeness to God, they become obstacles between people and God. But what I want to say is we're all sort of side points is that when you read the writings of Yahya Azal and when you read the writings of Baha'u'llah during the Baghdad period, during this time, which is more than 10 years, Yahya Azal has written a lot of works, and Baha'u'llah has written a lot of works. You are familiar with, most of you are familiar with some of the writings of Baha'u'llah during this time. I have studied almost all the writings of Yahya Azal and almost all the writings of Baha'u'llah during the Baghdad period. And so what I'm sharing with you is a factual statement that is not well known because people usually have not read the writings of Yahya Azal. What distinguishes writings of Yahya Azal versus Baha'u'llah during that same time of Baghdad is that we see two different interpretations of Babism takes place. Baha'u'llah's writings interpret and elaborate the writings of the Bab because he has not yet said that he's a new prophet of God. It's during the time of Baghdad, so he's a Babi. But the way he interprets and discusses Babi religion is based upon the idea that the Babi religion is also a religion of peace, and that it requires peace. That reconstruction of the concept of victory, that the way that you assist the cause of God is not by the sword, is by moral action, loving action, and by word and by pen. That is the way that Baha'u'llah is interpreting the religion of the Bab. The exact opposite is the position of Yahya Azal. If you read the writings of Yahya Azal, he's extremely violent. And so not only he returns to Shiism, but becomes even worse than Shiism in his writings. In a number of his books that are written during the time of Baghdad, like Kitab al-Nur, the Book of Light, or Al-Mustayqiz, the Awakener, these are among the most famous works of him during the time of Baghdad. In each one of them, at least I have counted more than 25 times that he orders the murder and the killing of all the non-Babis, and he says that no fidyeh and no jizyeh would be acceptable. Namely, contrary to the word of Islam, if they were willing to pay additional taxes, compensate and so on, their life might be saved. He says that no exception. They all should be killed. And the degree of violence that is present in his writings correspond to the fact that he himself was always in hiding and so on. Psychologically, it requires a psychologist. I'm not a psychologist. Psychologically, I think he wanted to be a leader. He had so much ambitions, but he was timid, and so he had to be constantly in hiding. The consequence of this contradiction was a lot of hatred, a lot of anger, a lot of violence. And so the way he defines the Babi religion is not the way the Bab discussed that, but he wants to return to the past. And it is for that reason that if you read the writings of Baha'u'llah, whenever he discusses the question of Yahya Azal and the Babis, he always is saying that these people are trying to take the people to the past, to the time of, and to the culture of Shia Islam. That's the constant common element in all discussions of Baha'u'llah with regard to the question of Yahya Azal and the Babis. That they are doing the same things that the Shia Muslims were doing in regard to, for example, the Bab. So, knowing this, I believe this is another reason that the Surah of Haykal begins a surah which wants to announce the cause of the world peace, which wants to emphasize the culture of peace, a new conception of victory. For that reason, given the community of the Babis around him, he has to first address that violent interpretation of Babism, and therefore reject and question that violent interpretation. And so in addition to the fact that this is his universal declaration, and that he is addressing naturally the first recent community, religious community, which was the Babis, the other reason for discussing the cause of the Babis in that particular work is that the culture that Yahya Azal was representing was absolute culture of violence, absolute culture of sword. It was distorting the Babi culture, not really understanding the Babi culture. And so before discussing the question of peace in more sociological terms, he addresses this question in the immediate theological. Can't discuss more because I want not to go into excess time today. Finally, I have written fulfillment of concealed revelation made of heaven. Concealed revelation, you remember what it was, we have discussed that. And Baha'u'llah receives divine revelation through made of heaven. That is the first point. And the second point, the first experience of revelation was that God tells Baha'u'llah that verily we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen. And then God continues by saying that, these are my paraphrase of the wordings, I don't remember the exact words, that God tells Baha'u'llah that don't be afraid, you are in safety. Soon God would raise the treasures of the world who would arise and would render your cause victorious. You remember that? That was the concealed revelation of Baha'u'llah. Now, the Surah of Temple is the continuation, affirmation, and fulfillment of that concealed revelation. In order to see that, I have put in the handout some of the first statements of the Surah of Temple. And you see that the same thing which is discussed in the concealed revelation is discussed here. So, Baha'u'llah says, for instance, while engulfed in tribulations, I heard a most wondrous, a most sweet voice calling above my head. Turning my face, I beheld a maiden, the embodiment of the remembrance of the name of my Lord, suspended in the air before me. O people of the Bayan, the Babis, O people of the Bayan, if ye aid him not, if you don't aid Baha'u'llah, if you don't render his cause victorious, God will assuredly assist him with the powers of earth and heaven and sustain him with the hosts of the unseen. The day is approaching when God will have, by an act of his will, raised up a race of men. It's talking about the idea that if you Babis don't fulfill the wish of the Bab, don't recognize Baha'u'llah, and you don't rise to render the cause of Baha'u'llah victorious, God would raise others. It's exactly the same thing which is discussed in the concealed revelation. And here is repeated exactly in that same form. Also, the same idea that assisting the cause of God, rendering the cause of God victorious, they are all the word Nusrat, which means all these ways. Rendering the cause of God victorious, assisting, aiding, all these are the same words. Takes place only through word and deeds, not through violence. So the next paragraph is a statement that a number of times in different ways is discussed and reaffirmed in the Surah of Haykal. Baha'u'llah says, say, we have ordained that our cause be taught through the power of utterance, Beware lest ye dispute idly with anyone. Disputation is forbidden because it's violence, verbal violence. Not only violence is forbidden by Baha'u'llah, but also violence of language, disputation, the form of language that you dispute. Like what we have right now as politics. Every discussion in the politics is disputation, every form. And it has become painful for me to turn on the news or listen to radio or TV because everything is disputation. It's all violence. And Baha'u'llah is forbidding linguistic violence as well. O people of Baha, subdue the citadel of men's hearts with a sort of wisdom and utterance. They that dispute as prompted by their desires are indeed wrapped in a palpable veil. So you can see that the element emphasizing the culture of peace, and that same culture which is mentioned and affirmed in the concealed revelation of Baha'u'llah when he was in the Tehran prison, is affirmed here exactly in the Surah of Temple. But this is the universal declaration of Baha'u'llah, but at the same time it is Surah of Temple. So we have a strange situation. Primarily, this tablet of Baha'u'llah is a discussion of the concept of temple. And yet the focus of Baha'u'llah is the concept of peace. The entire work in one way or another is centered around the concept of unity and world peace. Now the question is, what is the relation of this concept of temple, heikal? This concept of temple, what does it have to do with peace or with declaration of Baha'u'llah or these other things that we are discussing? That's what I want to a little bit clarify. Before I begin the concept of temple in prior scriptures, look at the last paragraph in the first page. When it says for temple in Surah of Temple, you see that? Then there is a statement of Baha'u'llah, this is in the Surah of Temple, but this is the last paragraph of the Surah of Temple. Surah of Temple ends with this particular statement. See what Baha'u'llah is saying. Baha'u'llah is defining the entire Surah of Temple, the entire writing that he did, everything that he did, as a process of construction of a temple. So this is his last word. Thus means, namely, through all these writings, through all these words, through these concepts that he has created, the message of peace that he has discussed. Thus we have built the temple with the hands of power and might. Could ye but know it? This is the temple promised unto you in the book. Draw ye nigh unto it. Be fair, O peoples of the earth. Which is preferable, this or a temple which is built of clay? It's making contrast. Traditional conception of temple is a building made of clay. Baha'u'llah, of course, didn't build a temple out of clay. He built that temple through the Surah of Temple. The entire Surah of Temple is the process of construction of temple, and for him, this is fulfillment of the prophecies of the past. So the fact that it's a Surah of Temple, Surah of Heikal, is central in the consciousness of Baha'u'llah about this particular work. So let's look at very briefly the very components of this concept of temple. The word which is used here, Surah of Temple, is Surah of Heikal. So, and this word Heikal sometimes is translated as temple, sometimes in the Surah of Temple, the way it is translated as body. We'll see that. A few points I have put that in bolds. You'll see that. But that word body is heikal, is temple. So first let's look at the temple in the Bible. Definitely Baha'u'llah is addressing the concept of temple in the biblical traditions as well. So a very important element in Jewish conception of temple is the statement in Exodus, and here God is commanding that a temple would be created for him. At first, this temple was in the form of a tabernacle because they had to be moving. They didn't have a fixed place. And later, that is going to be turned into a fixed place, which Solomon is going to build that. So God says, then have them make a sanctuary for me. The word is makdash, which in Arabic becomes maqdas, namely the holy place, from the word Quds, muqaddas. A holy place, sanctuary, a place which has sanctity. Then have them make a sanctuary for me, God is saying, and I will dwell among them. God is going to live among the people by living in that holy place. That holy place is the place that God is going to reside. And the word is mashkan, which is the Arabic Persian word maskan. And after that, make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. And then God says exactly how it should be made, details of that and so on. Tabernacle, ohel in Hebrew, becomes the first expression of this holy place. Now, when this concept of temple is being discussed, sometimes the word heikal, which in the usual Hebrew ways, it is normally said hechal or hechal. But it is really heikal. In Hebrew, the original Hebrew is also heikal. But heikal or hechal sometimes becomes expression of the entire temple. Sometimes it becomes expression of the middle part of the temple. So temple has three parts. First, that is introduction. Then is the large middle part, and then is the Holy of Holy. In Arabic, Quds al-Aqdas. In Hebrew, Kadishim, I guess, from the word Quds, which means holy. The holy of the holiest, the most holy place. That's the place that the ark is going to reside. So Hechal or Heikal is sometimes expression for the entire, sometimes it is expression for that middle part when people gather and the like. So the word Heikal that Baha'u'llah is using, this word is a Hebrew word. And in the Hebrew Bible, it's not just a general term. And every construction or every tall place, then in Arabic becomes heikal. So a human being can also have a heikal. A tall human being has a heikal. A tall building also is a heikal, including, of course, Temple of God particularly. Now, let's come to the gospel. Gospel comes up with a new set of ideas. And sometimes it is implied that Jesus becomes the temple. The new temple, to some extent, becomes Jesus. But also the concept of temple becomes very, very important for the second coming of Jesus, for the time of deliverance. So in Revelations, John is discussing this divine vision that he's being shown. So he says, I saw the holy city, Jerusalem, because the temple is in Jerusalem. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. So a new Jerusalem is going to descend from the earth. And that means that God is going to come to this temple. But then, a few verses later, it says, I did not see a temple in the city, namely in this New Jerusalem. I did not see a temple in the city because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. In the future, when spiritual liberation of humanity is going to take place, the glory of God, which is mentioned a number of times in Revelation, the glory of God becomes the temple. Baha'u'llah becomes the temple, the supreme temple. Temple, instead of being a particular place, becomes a temple. Now, before going to other things, I want to mention one thing which is very important. And that's a very beautiful element in the Bible. The Bible has so many beautiful things. This is one of my favorite points in the entire Bible. The Bible says a number of times that it was supposed that David would build the first temple. But David killed too many, shed too much blood. And so for that reason, God did not allow that the temple of God to be built by David. Because the concept of temple of God is opposed to the concept of bloodshed. And for that reason, it was left to Solomon to build the temple. The reason that Solomon built a temple was the fact that he did not shed the blood according to the Bible like David. And it is important to know that the word Solomon in the Bible, I think is shalomeh, something like that, is the same as the word peace. Solomon means peace, or what we, in Arabic and Persian we say Suleiman. Suleiman is the same as the word salam, shalom, is peace. The name of Solomon becomes Solomon because he was going to be a representative of peace, and that is why God allowed him to build the temple. So you can see that from the beginning, the concept of a temple of God has direct connection with the concept of peace. And now Baha'u'llah is writing this Surah of temple, is creating this new temple, which is not out of clay. But the basic point of this construction of this temple is his writings for creation of a world of unity and peace. The intimate connection between the concept of peace and the concept of temple, and both of them are the ways that Baha'u'llah is declaring to the world for the first time in a very public, universal way to everybody, not in a veiled fashion. His station, his reality, his message is because of the unity of all these things. Now, the next point I have written, temple in the writings of the Bab. I have to be very short about this. The first statement that I have written here is by one of the statements of the Bab. He's addressing the Muhammad Shah when he is in Maku. And he's criticizing the Prime Minister Haji Mirza Aghasi. So this is what the Bab says. Evidently, His Excellency the Haji, namely the Prime Minister Mirza Aghasi, is not fully aware of the truth of our cause. It would be far more heinous a deed to sadden the the hearts of the faithful, whether men or women, than to lay waste the sacred house of God. It's a very powerful statement. The Bab is saying that making a faithful person, the heart of a faithful person, sad is far worse than destroying Kaaba, destroying the house of God, destroying the most sacred place for the world of Islam, which is Kaaba. And the reason, of course, is that for the Bab, as he explains that fully in Persian Bayan and so on, is that the hearts of people are the real temple of God. These temples of God, whether it is in Mecca or is in Jerusalem or other places, they are symbols of the true temple. And that true temple, before everything else, is the hearts of the people. And so saddening, bringing grief and sadness to the hearts of the people is much worse than destroying the temple of God, the house of God. This is the Bab writing in, around 1847 to the king of Iran. For you and me, this concept might be understandable, but you have to put yourself in the shoe of that time to see what a powerful statement, revolutionary statement the Bab is saying. And then says, verily, the one true God bears me witness that in this day I am the true mystic fane of God. This, what is translated mystic fane of God, is Baytullah, house of God, Kaaba. The Bible is saying, I am, in this day I am the house of God, the true house of God. I am the real house of God. I am the real temple, the temple of God. God resided, dwelt, you remember the Exodus, dwelt and resides in temple, which for the world of Islam, now God resides in Kaaba, in Mecca. The Bab is saying that the true house of God, the true place that God resides, the home of God, I am. And this is a central point of all the writings of the Bab, that the houses of God, which are made of clay, they are symbols. Those clays are not superior to any other clays. They become sacred because of their relation to the word of the Prophet of God. It is the word of Prophet of God, it's the revelation of God which is sacred. And for that reason, the body of the Prophet of God is the supreme house of God. The closest in the world of creation, in the material physical world, the closest entity to the actual word of God, revelation of God, becomes the body of the Prophet. Everything else would have a secondary, tertiary relation to the will of God, to the revelation of God. For that reason, from the point of view of the Bab, and as we'll see from the point of view of the Baha'u'llah, always the supreme, and I say supreme, the ultimate supreme house of God, the ultimate supreme temple of God are always prophets of God, manifestation of God. At the time of Moses, Moses was the supreme temple. At the time of Jesus, Jesus was the supreme temple. At the time of the Bab, and he makes it explicit now, that he was the temple. At the time of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah is the supreme temple of God. But this is the time that the truth of scriptures is becoming unveiled. People think that the Bab went to pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina in order to fulfill the prophecies which says that when the promised one comes, he goes to Mecca. This is a very shallow statement and understanding. The Bab went there not in order to, in an artificial fashion, to make a prophecy to come true. It has so many layers of mystical writings. The Bab went to Mecca because Mecca was the house of God because of his word. The Bab is the same as Muhammad and is the same as the Quran. It was by that word that this particular clay became sacred. Not because of its intrinsic characteristics. It's a symbol of the temple of God. Now the real temple of God has come. And he goes there partly because out of his love for the people, so that all these Muslim pilgrims who are going to pilgrimage at that time, they would not be going to a false pilgrimage. Because once the new prophet of God comes, the relation, that symbolic relation is dissociated. From now on, temple of God is where the new prophet of God would say. By the presence of the real temple of God in Mecca, at the time of pilgrimage, all those Muslims really were in the presence of the house of God. This was out of love of the Bab. And at the same time, he was telling the world that the real temple of God has appeared. That this house of Mecca is a symbol of the true temple of God, which is the reality, the word, and of course the body of manifestation of God. The revelation of God, the word of God, that is the temple of God. That is the house of God. By presence of the Bab in that place, which symbolically up to that point was representing him, he is announcing that the age of the spiritual, hidden spiritual truth has started. The other statement is in Arabic Bayan. The Bab says, Qibla, the turning point towards the house of God. That for your prayers, you turn towards that. You pray towards the house of God. The Qibla is indeed he whom God will make manifest. Whenever he moves, it moves until he shall come to rest. So first the Bab said that he is that house of God. Now he says that the real house of God is he whom God shall make manifest. Whenever he moves, the Qibla, the turning place, the house of God moves with him until he establishes in a place. And that place is the shrine of Baha'u'llah in Bahji. That's why it is the Baha'i Qibla. Because the body of Baha'u'llah is the closest thing to the celestial spiritual realm of divine revelation. Nothing is as close to that. The next statement, I don't discuss that. Well, I have to discuss it. The word temple in the writings of the Bab now becomes first manifestation of God, and then all human beings. All human beings becomes temple of God. And so because of this, the word temple and the concept of temple takes a particular form or shape in the writings of the Bab, which is expressing the shape of human being. So Heikal, or temple, in the writings of the Bab, consists of 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it creates an image of something like a human being. And the Bab emphasizes why this form of human being becomes temple of God. Anything that the Bab does in terms of symbolism are layers and layers of spiritual meanings. In the statement that I have here, and you should read it and work on that yourself, the Bab is saying that the ultimate temple, of course, is reference to God. He, Ova, he, reference to God. So this human form becomes a symbol of God, symbol of he. And how it becomes symbol of he? In Arabic, he is Hova, consisting of 2 letters, H and V, or H and W. H is equal to 5. V is equal to 6. Together it becomes 11. So the word for God, he or Hova, is equal to 11. And this 11 is 5 plus 6. Now in this form that Heikal, the Bab, is creating, you have 5 lines. 1 line, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 contiguous lines. Out of these 5 lines, 6 chambers are created. You have to do that and we see. So the outward form is 5. The inner form is 6. So this becomes symbol of human being, which is 5 plus 6, which literally becomes Hova. He, reflection of God. Human being becomes literally, symbolically, expression of God, becomes the house of God. Finally, temple in the Surah of Heikal. My discussion was supposed to be all based upon this part, but already I have spent a lot of time, so I'll just give the outlines of the issues and so on. So the first statement that I have here, I read it before. At the end of the Surah of Temple, Baha'u'llah said that this way I constructed this temple. In the beginnings of the Surah of Temple, Baha'u'llah is discussing himself as the supreme temple. And his declaration means that this temple is manifesting itself. It's like Adam coming into existence. And out of this temple, but this is a creative temple, other temples, other human beings with a spiritual heart are going to be created. So the supreme temple becomes Baha'u'llah by his declaration, which this is his declaration. Other temples are going to be created. Those treasures of the earth that in the concealed revelation he is speaking that they would arise. So if you read in the second page, the first paragraph is discussing of Baha'u'llah as the supreme Heikal, as the supreme temple, out of which all these temples are being created. It's the day of resurrection, and they are being risen up within Baha'u'llah. I won't read it because we don't have time, but you yourself should read that. Begins with this, raise up then from this temple. This temple is Baha'u'llah. This Heikal. The temples of the oneness of God, that they may tell out in the kingdom of creation the tidings of their Lord. A new culture is going to be created, a spiritual culture is going to be created out of this temple. Now, here we see that the concept of temple, in the Surah of Temple, first becomes the manifestation of God, the supreme temple, and then becomes human beings with a spiritual emphasis, with their spiritual truth. The hearts of the people is the throne of God, and so that is the temple of God. By the way, all these discussions in the writings of the Bab, in the writings of Baha'u'llah, that attaining the presence of God, namely seeing the God, coming into contact with God, which is mentioned in all the scriptures, always is discussed. Attaining the presence of God means attaining the presence of the manifestation of God. Why? Because we come to see God, we come to communicate with God through the manifestation of God. Manifestation of God is the supreme temple, because God dwells and resides in the temple. If we want to see the God, then we have to go and see the manifestation of God. That whole concept of attaining the presence of God is a philosophical, theological underpinnings of all these discussions of temple and the like. Now, in addition to these two layers of the temple, Baha'u'llah as the supreme temple of God, and then human beings and their hearts, and emergence of a new race of humanity with a new culture, a spiritual culture, which becomes temples of God. Surah of Temple is also emphasizing a third meaning of temple, and this has no precedence, neither in the writings of the Bab, nor in Gospel, nor anywhere else. And this is the most important meaning of the temple. So let's look at the immediate two statements and the places that I have put that in bold. Baha'u'llah is addressing members of parliaments of the world. O ye the elected representatives of the people in every land, members of the parliaments of the world. Take ye counsel together, and let your concern be only for that which profiteth mankind and betters the condition thereof, if ye be of them that scan heedfully. This by itself could have solved all sociological, political problems of the world. Imagine that the concept of democracy, the concept of parliaments, would be reinterpreted in the way that Baha'u'llah is saying. He's saying that members of the parliaments, they should come and have consultation with each other. But the basis of their consultation and the purpose of their consultation for each one of these people should be what to do to serve the humanity, what to do to realize the interests of the entire human race. Not interests of just my country or my religion or my race or my gender or my city or my tribe. The parliaments have to become democracy for Baha'u'llah is emphasized, but a true democracy, a true parliament is based upon a consultation which is based upon an ethics of consciousness of the unity and sanctity of all human beings. I read it again. O ye the elected representatives of the people in every land, take ye counsel together, and let your concern be only for that which profiteth mankind and betters the condition thereof. And then he says, the most important statement, in my judgment, of the entire Surah of Haykal. And this statement, he mentions that, I believe, 3 times. 2 of them I have put here. Regard the world as the human body. Regard the world as the human body. The word, original word, is not the human body. It's the Haykal of insan, the Haykal of human being. فَانْظُرُ الْعَالَمِ, regard the world, كَحَيْكَلِ إِنسَانٍ, like the Haykal of a human being. Because the way it is translated, of course, this Haykal means the body here. But because the word Haykal, the word temple, is not mentioned, in translation it becomes more difficult to understand what is happening. Baha'u'llah is giving a new conception, new definition of temple. The supreme temple of God is that order, the new world order, global order, in which humanity would see the entire world as one human body, as one organic entity, as one temple of God. A culture, an institutional order of oneness, of peace, in which all humanity are interdependent, like one organic human body, that everything is interdependent, affecting each other, together becomes one. It's unity in diversity. Realization of this new order that Baha'u'llah says that the world has become one, but you don't know. And so your consciousness and your institutions are not in accordance with the reality of the time. That you have to change your consciousness and you have to change the institutions of the world in order to make it compatible with the truth of the world right now, which has become one. And this one world, the world which becomes not potentially, but in reality, in all different forms of that, as one human body, as this organic, united, peaceful entity, this is the supreme temple of God. This is the temple that Baha'u'llah is constructing. Baha'u'llah himself is this temple of God. But realization of this glory of God, first in the hearts of the people through a new culture, and then realization of that beyond the level of individual. Individual morality is important, but it's not enough. The whole institutional structure of the world has to change. And this new institutional structure of the world, unity and peace, that becomes temple of God. God is no longer residing in one building. God is residing everywhere. The time has come that the entire world becomes the temple of God. the time has come that the entire world becomes a reflection of the kingdom of God. God would not be in a specific place, but in the hearts of the people and in the institutional, structural arrangement of the world order, God manifests itself. This is the time that heaven and earth are now united. It's a new heaven. It's a new earth. This is the new Jerusalem which comes. And there is no temple. The temple becomes the glory of God, becomes the concept of peace. The rest of statements are the ways that Baha'u'llah in Surah of Temple discusses how we can realize the peace. And that, of course, is the most important part of this discussion that we should have, but because of a shortage of time, I won't address it. But just I tell you the outline of the conclusion. One of my areas is peace studies. Before coming to UCLA, I was a sociologist, I was teaching sociology, and one of my areas was peace studies. So always I taught in Minnesota courses on peace studies. When you look at peace studies, the contemporary existing theories of peace, how we can realize peace, there are four main theories. There are a number of theories, but four main theories. One of them is called realism, which really says that peace is not possible because the world is an anarchic place. We have states that they have to take care of themselves. And so each state sees the other states as potential or actual threat, enemy. So the only way that states can feel secure and survive is that make themselves militarily powerful. But the other state also looks like this, and so the result is arms race. And so, according to realist theory, real peace is never possible because the condition of the world requires this. Wars can be delayed, can be minimized, but it can't be eliminated. Another theory is democratic peace theory, which believes that democracies rarely engage in war with each other. Democracies and non-democracies easily get into war with each other. Non-democracies easily get into war with each other. But democracies and democracies rarely get into war with each other. And statistically, that is correct. So according to this theory, if we move towards democracy in different countries, if all different countries become democratic, then we move towards peace. The third theory is a cultural theory, which believes that peace is realized when people believe that peace is good. As long as people find honor and glory in war, then wars are going to happen. So if we create culture of peace, then peace is realized. The final theory is a theory which says war ultimately is an expression of social inequality. When there is social inequality, that ultimately leads to violence, including international violence. So movement towards social justice, taking care of the poor, these are the means that we can move towards peace. Now, these theories are all enemies of each other. Namely, this theory believes that all those other theories are wrong, and they all try to prove that they are only right, the others are wrong. These are the theories right now. These are the highest expressions of this discussion in peace theories, in political science, in international relations, in sociology, in feminist studies, all of them. This is the highest. When you look at the Surah of Temple of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah is addressing all these concepts and all these theories. But instead of saying that one is the cause of peace, the others are unimportant, he takes a multidimensional approach. So for realization of peace, we have to change the world in terms of all of them. For the first question, theory of realism, for Baha'u'llah, the theory of realism, of course, realism did not exist at the time of Baha'u'llah. But hypothetically, For Baha'u'llah, what realism proves is not that peace is not possible. It proves that the present structure of nationalistic, anarchic structure is incompatible with peace. So if we want to have peace, we have to move towards collective security. That the countries of the world engage in not only consultation within themselves, but among themselves. A global understanding that the world is one, and therefore moving towards elimination of arms race and collective security. That's why Baha'u'llah is constantly discussing in Surah of Temple the necessity of movement towards arms race. In addition, Baha'u'llah in the Surah of Temple is emphasizing consultation and praising democracy. Queen of Victoria, among all these people that are addressed by Baha'u'llah, was reigning in a country which had some democratic parliamentary elements. None of the others had. It is for that reason that when Baha'u'llah is addressing her, that he praises both elimination, making slavery unlawful, or at least a slave trade in England, and parliamentarism and democracy. And in all his writings also, he constantly is talking about consultation, constantly talking about necessity of democracy. But democracy for him is like what we have been discussing, replacing the sword by the word. Democracies which right now exist, the word has become the sword. Namely, people don't engage in consultation. People are not investigating the truth. People want just to humiliate the other group. Sometimes they know that what they say is wrong. But just because they want to humiliate the other group, prove that the other group is wrong, they talk in a particular fashion. This is not democracy that Baha'u'llah is talking about. It's a democracy of consultation. It's a democracy which is a spiritual, based upon the belief in the nobility and beauty of all human beings. So we can disagree, but we should love each other. And for that reason, we all should be humble. And we should think independently. We should not be members of this party or that party. We should not renounce our mind by becoming slaves and puppets of this party or that party. This is exactly the same thing that in religious fanaticism is being done. That people decide not to think for themselves, but the clerics would think for themselves. Now clerics have become, for instance, in a secular context, have become political leaders, political experts and so on. This renunciation of reason is destroying democracy. Democracy means that we say no to the logic of jungle, that we love each other, we understand that we are all one. And then we discuss and consult and try to learn from each other. Not just to, discussion is not a war, but is a place of independent investigation of truth. We should hope that in the future, democracy starts to be realized. The democracy that Baha'u'llah is talking about, which is conducive to peace, is that democracy. And of course, the entire Surah of Temple is discussion of social justice. Let me just say one statement of Baha'u'llah, and the culture of peace is all over. That whole concept of temple, the new kind of human being, this is a spiritual being, who is the temple of God, who reflects divine and spiritual characteristics and so on, is all discussion of the type of culture that a person should have in order for peace to become realized. But as my last statement, let's look at this statement of Baha'u'llah in the Surah of Haykal. He's addressing the kings of the earth. He says, "O kings of the earth, we see you increasing every year your expenditures and laying the burden thereof on your subjects. This verily is wholly and grossly unjust. Fear the sighs and tears of this wronged one, and lay not excessive burdens on your people. I want you to pay attention to this statement. Baha'u'llah says, fear the sighs and the tears of this wronged one. This is the way Guardian translated. But when you read the original says, fear the sighs of the poor, of the oppressed. But the Guardian knows he's the authorized interpreter of the words of Baha'u'llah. So he really knows what Baha'u'llah is saying. So the way he translated is not fear the sighs of the poor, of the oppressed. He says, fear the sighs of this wronged one, namely the sighs of Baha'u'llah. This is for me one of the most touching aspects of the Surah of Temple. Baha'u'llah is identifying himself with the sufferings of the poor, of the oppressed of the world. Their sufferings are the sufferings of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah's tears are the tears of the people of the world. This is constantly the element emphasis on economic justice, social justice, but from a totally new ways. At the end of this same paragraph, he is addressing the kings, and he says, by them, namely by the people, by them ye rule, by their means ye subsist, by their aid ye conquer, yet how disdainfully ye look upon them, how strange, how very strange. In one of my previous talks, I have explained this, and so I won't discuss that. It's a powerful statement, sociologically extremely important. Is the philosophical foundation of the concept of real democracy. That the power of the king is nobody. The power of the king, power of a state is always the power of the people. It is because of the people that the state, the king, or whoever has power, has wealth, and so on. And for that reason, the truth of a state, the truth of political power, is the power of the people. And so the pride and arrogance of a statesman, of tyrants of the world, disdainfully looking at the people, for Baha'u'llah is so very strange. When you read the Surah of Temple, before anything else, Baha'u'llah is constantly rejecting pride. A number of times in the Surah of Temple, it says that you should not act in an arrogant fashion when you see the poor. Pride is so important in the writings of Baha'u'llah. Pride is the supreme sign that a person is not spiritual. In the Surah of Temple, it says Baha'u'llah to the kings and to the ordinary people, when they see the poor and they look down at them with pride and arrogance. Baha'u'llah says, remember that you yourself are created from a drop of water. All of us are created from the dust. All of us are created from a drop of water. None of us are anything. But we are supreme when we become reflection of the attributes of God. We become the temple of God. We are simultaneously glorious and at the same time nothing. The attitude of arrogance is the attitude of ignorance of a sovereign self who thinks that is independent from the world and superior to the world. And to understand how entirely false is this, just for a few moments, try not to breathe. But just take your nose. See, in a moment that you die, we, with all these arrogance and pretensions and so on, we are so dependent on the air. This air, this physical material thing, let alone other things. Immediately we die. We are part of this interaction of life with nature, with others. It's humility, cooperation, love, which is the truth of reality and truth of ourselves. And so, anyway, Baha'u'llah is discussing not only political democracy, not only social justice, not only the question of collective security, but also a culture of peace which doesn't just say peace is good, war is bad. That is not important. A real culture of peace in varieties of fashions. And so Baha'u'llah is universally declaring his station. And his point and his aim and his revelation is not based upon giving us some metaphysical ideas about the other world and things like that. They are secondary. The most important thing is to change the world towards peace and unity. This was his purpose. This was his message. And this becomes the new supreme temple of God. And that's why through these writings he has created a new temple. Thank you very much.